Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
It is now 6:07, and we're just charging through this Thursday morning. I hope you do the same with whatever you've got to accomplish in this great day in your nation's capital. Coming up in 30 minutes, Joe diGenova, a special appearance to dissect some of these court rulings we just did our best to go through. It's 7:05. Reagan Reese, White House correspondent for Daily Caller, is traveling with J.D. Vance at the border. 7:35 is Representative Andrew Clyde, who forced Muriel Bowser's hand on BLM Plaza. 8:05, KT McFarland, and at 8:35, Chuck Thies on D.C. politics. And Trump telling Muriel Bowser, clean up the city or I will. It's Larry with Mercedes this morning. Good morning, Mercy.
Good morning.
By the way, President Trump, this whole, get rid of Black Lives Matter, get rid of the criminal vagrants that are polluting the streets and defecating on our sidewalks, get rid of the panhandlers and the beggars, enforce the law, clean up the city, bring businesses back to Washington, D.C. I first heard Donald Trump say that on the stage at CPAC, I want to say 3 years ago in Orlando. He said if D.C. is a mess and if they can't fix it, then the federal government will take over as constitutionally we can, and we're going to fix it. It's a beautiful thing to see. I can't believe that people in D.C. have been putting up with this dysfunction for so long.
Yeah, and, look, I think that you've seen D.C., which is a beautiful city, just completely start crumbling with all the, the crime, the homelessness, with even the gang members that are in that area. It's awful. I mean, it is truly, truly awful. And I think they've focused so much on Black Lives Matter and all their DEI initiatives as well, which I think has really hurt the city. And so, I'm glad you have the Republicans who are trying to hold the mayor accountable and being involved in getting DC back to where it used to be. We're ready for the golden age of Washington, D.C.
Thank you. It is. It's a beautiful city. It once was, and it should be again, but they've let it go to hell. Yesterday, the nominee for the National Institute of Health had his hearing. And it's funny, in administrations gone by, whoever runs the FDA or the NIH or even Health and Human Services didn't get a whole lot of attention. But ever since the pandemic, Mercy, we realize how much power these people can wield and how governors used the decisions from CDC, NIH, even though they technically don't have direct power over our lives. Governors and even school boards would take their advice and say, well, we're just following their guidance. And then there's you go to the school board or you go to the governor and you try to hold them accountable and they say, hey, don't blame us. We were taking guidance from the CDC. And then you go back to the CDC and you say, well, don't blame us. We were just putting out opinions, but we don't enforce anything. So suddenly nobody's accountable. Well, yesterday, Trump's nominee for NIH, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who, by the way, his name looks intimidating, but it's not that hard to pronounce. Listen on Cut 9 here. Bernie Sanders absolutely mangles. Listen to Bernie Sanders in Cut 9 here.
But with all due respect, Dr. Bhattacharya, President Trump will not be giving you that authority.
I'm sorry. He's the smartest man in the Senate. I'm sorry, Bernie. How does that go? Is that the original Soviet Union pronunciation, Bernie?
Bhattacharya.
That's it.
Bhattacharya.
I like that.
It's Italian.
Yes, exactly. I like it with a little eggplant parm on the side. It's good. Very good. All right. So anyway, Dr. J, let's call him, basketball player. He was one of the clarion voices at the very onset of the pandemic. And when Anthony Fauci was out there saying, we got to shut everything down. And he was like, no, in fact, that's going to cause more harm. That's going to cause, and he has been validated. If you look at what Sweden did, if you look at what Florida eventually did when they, thumbed a nose to Fauci, clearly he was right. Listen to this, Cut 5. It's so important for you to hear what he says about the NIH, what its role really should be, and how it was completely out of control. Listen now from yesterday's hearing.
Proper role of scientists in a pandemic is to answer basic questions that policymakers have about what the right policy should be. Our role isn't to make decisions to say you shouldn't be saying goodbye to your your grandfather as he's dying in a hospital. It shouldn't be to say you can't have a funeral because it's too dangerous. The scientists should say, here's what the risks are. And then you decide what the risk, whether you take it. The role of the scientist shouldn't be to say you can't send your kids to school for 2 years, that you can't you should close hospitals so that they can't treat heart attack patients. That you should not. The role of scientists should be to address those problems by giving good data, and then let people make the science should be an engine for freedom. Knowledge and freedom, not something where it stands on top of society and says you must do this, this, and this, or else. It shouldn't be pushing mandates for vaccines that have been like the COVID vaccines that were tested for a relatively short period of time. I took the COVID vaccine myself, but I think that the mandates that many scientists push have led to the lack of confidence that so much of the public has in science. If science is a force for freedom and for knowledge, it will have universal support. That's what the role of science is.
Oh my! I mean, how refreshing
Love it.
is that?
I mean, that he's right. He's right. It is about, and I think like when you see what Dr. Fauci did in terms of his kind of arrogant attitude on what we had to do, whether it was social distancing, which made absolutely no sense. I mean, I remember we would do the whole, like, really 6 feet, give me a break. Do we need, measuring tape to measure the 6 feet? And then the mask, and then the mandates, and the get the vaccines, and then the stigma attached to if you didn't get the vaccine. It was horrible. I mean, you were shunned, closed out of businesses, and not being able to, go to work, basically. I mean, it is shameful, the authoritarian control of the government at the time, which caused, I think, so much pain, death, and destruction during that COVID pandemic. And so it's so refreshing to hear Dr. Bhattacharya. Did I say it right? Chara?
I don't know. Let's ask Bernie Sanders. Did Mercy get that one right, Bernie?
Bhattacharya.
Yeah, no, I think you were a little off. No, you're 100% right. And I remember Fauci during one of his hearings, or maybe it was a press conference, saying, I follow the science, not the Constitution. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. And go ahead and give me the information, give me advice, and then let me and my elected officials make the wise choice about policy. But you don't set this policy and tell me if I disagree with you that I'm anti-science and in some way a Neanderthal. Hold that thought. There's more from this hearing yesterday that we want to talk about, and about what we went through and how quickly people forget exactly how our liberties were trampled on during the pandemic. Never again. It's 6:15.
WMAL, making sense of the news.
Yesterday, the nominee for National Institute of Health, Dr. J, we're calling him because we're still not clear. It appears as though his name is Bhattacharya. But if you listen to Bernie Sanders, you get, I guess, the more official, nuanced Singaporean pronunciation. Bernie, how's that go?
Bhattacharya.
Yeah. Now we're going to start saying that. Larry, we can't put that out too much.
I know. I should stop.
I could only handle so much. Why don't we call him Dr. J? Yo.
Dr.
J.
Dr. J. Yo, Dr. J. Dr. J, who, by the way, was a Stanford professor, expert in this field. He raised his voice on social media and other platforms saying, we're wrong about the shutdown. This is going to cause more harm than good. There's no need for it. Let this thing play out. He was censored. His account was deleted at one point or suspended because the Biden administration put a full court press on anyone, no matter what, whether it was your brother-in-law who, is a mechanic and had a different opinion, or whether it was this guy at the top of his field at Stanford. They shut him down too. And it was totalitarianism. He also called into question the story we were hearing from Fauci and from other people about the origins of this virus. And in cut 7 here, he addressed that specifically.
And I want to work with the Congress to make sure that there's appropriate regulation of any risky research. The NIH should have, I don't think should be doing any research that has the potential to cause a pandemic. And I want to work with Congress to make sure that happens.
Well, there's a a novel idea. Hey, maybe the United States National Institute of Health should not be doing any kind of risky research that could lead to a global pandemic, or
No
fund that
kidding.
research through the communist Chinese.
I know.
Why do we
I
even
mean,
have to say this?
if anyone thought that was a good idea, especially let's remember the Chinese covered up data. They covered up the dead bodies. They did everything they can in not providing and not sharing information on the COVID pandemic to the United States and to other governments across the globe. So by the time it came to the United States, I remember it was the former NIH director. They were all struggling to deal with, and the CDC, to figure out how and when this pandemic was going to hit the United States. They did not know how to deal with it, too, because there was no sharing of information because the Chinese were just hiding everything. Just think about that. Because they were like, no, the numbers are not that bad. People aren't dying here in China. It's like, it was insane. It was absolutely insane.
Right. And the World Health Organization refused to condemn them. It's like, and again, all of these agencies that act like they're the UN or something, and they try to run interference with bad actors on the global scene.
Yeah.
Dr. J took up the issue of transparency yesterday and full disclosure of issues like this. Why should there be secrecy in the National Institute of Health? Cut 8.
As far as trust, I think the key thing is we have to be utterly open. If I'm confirmed, I'll be the head of an organization that's a scientific organization. As a citizen, I would often look for FOIA responses from the NIH, Freedom of Information Act requests, and they'd be fully redacted during the pandemic. You can't have trust unless you are transparent. And if I'm confirmed as NIH director, I fully commit to making sure that the American people can see all of the activities of the NIH openly with limited sort of obfuscation, which is characterized, I think, unfortunately, the NIH's way that they interacted with the American people.
Yeah, it makes no sense that our National Institute of Health wouldn't be fully transparent. What in the hell is going on at the NIH that needs to be, censored, top secret, classified, and behind closed doors? Finally, cut 10 here. He talked about the censorship he endured and about how that is contrary to having any sort of faith and trust in the scientific process. Listen.
I'm really glad you highlighted the role of censorship and restriction of scientific discussion. It was so refreshing to me to be allowed to speak my scientific views in Florida during the pandemic. I think the root problem, a pandemic is a very difficult thing. There's so many people are going to have different ideas in an environment of uncertainty. The root problem was that people who had alternative ideas were suppressed. I personally was subject to censorship by the actions of the Biden administration during the pandemic. Science, to succeed, needs free speech. It needs an environment where there's tolerance for dissent. And the reason I think why Florida did so well was that it provided an outlet for that dissent, so that the government of Florida, the state of Florida, could adopt the best ideas for its. It's not that no mistakes were ever made. You can't say that of any state in a pandemic. But in order to do well, you have to allow people to speak with each other openly, even when the ideas are controversial.
I got to tell you, Larry, I think that's one of the most important statements that Dr. J has made, because it was during the COVID pandemic that, remember, it was it was trying to eliminate any misinformation. It was the tech companies working with the White House to shut down any dissenting voices. It was a complete, absolute disaster. These doctors could not raise the questions of, what if there's better treatments in the hospital? Maybe don't put the patients on the ventilators. Maybe use ivermectin that got vilified by so many doctors. And we had to secretly get ivermectin through, people would call me all the time being, can you call Dr. Miller to go get ivermectin? Larry, we all lived through it. And so he's absolutely right. The censorship, the attacks on these doctors who were on the ground day one, saving people's lives, and they were the ones that were completely, I think, victims of this NIH monster and the federal government imposing these draconian, tactics, which I think silenced them.
And the legacy media is partly to blame here, about much to blame, too, for playing along with it. They didn't care about our freedoms or freedom of the press as long as they were able to continue to make their money and get bailed out. You're 100% right. This is refreshing. It's great. I can't wait for the new regime to be fully in place. Dr. J should be confirmed immediately. And the one lesson out of the pandemic that you just heard in that last comment there from him during his confirmation hearing, every time the government tries to tell you that they know best and they want to run your lives and tell you what you can and can't do, always go back to the Constitution. It's funny. Our founders seemed to have an idea of what was right and wrong. And everything, when shot through the lens of our personal freedoms and liberties, we always seem to be right. It always works out that way. It's 6:23.
Bhattacharya.
Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, O'Connor and Company.
It's 6:37. It's O'Connor and Company on a Thursday in your nation's capital. Thank you for letting us be a part of your morning routine. We're going to reward you with some intelligent and hopefully entertaining discussions about what's going on in the world around us, especially here in Washington. It's 7:05. Reagan Reese, White House correspondent for the Daily Caller, who just traveled with J.D. Vance to the border. 7:35. Representative Andrew Clyde of Georgia, who forced Muriel Bowser's hand on the Black Lives Matter mural. 8:05, KT McFarland, latest out on Ukraine and Hamas. And then at 8:35, Chuck Dees, D.C. political analyst, Trump also challenging Muriel Bowser. Clean up homeless encampments. Clean up the city, or I'll do it. How does that play out? We'll discuss it. And when I say we, I mean me and the mouse in my pocket. No, me and Mercedes Schlapp. Good morning, Mercedes.
Goodness gracious. A mouse in your pocket?
Yeah,
is that what I've become?
that
That's insane.
Yeah.
Huh?
No, it's like when you'd say, "Hey, are we going to do this?" and they'd be like, "Who's we? You and the mouse in your pocket?" Is that like a Midwestern
That
thing?
is so American. Like the Cubans don't get it. They just don't get it.
Well, I'll tell you who does get it, because he gets everything. Joe diGenova, legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney to the District of Columbia. He joins us now for a special Thursday appearance because there's some court rulings here that we need your help with, Joe. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Let's start with the Supreme Court. This 5-4 vote with Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Roberts joining the liberals, having to do with this U.S. District Court Judge Amir Ali in Maryland, $2 billion to an NGO. Well, first of all, this wasn't an actual full-on decision about the executive powers here, was it?
No, this was part of a TRO, a temporary restraining order, which the court had originally decided not to get involved in, and then it decided to get involved in it. More strange activity by the Supreme Court. This was a temporary restraining order issued to force the release of billions of dollars. The court ordered the TRO to stay in place, which means the money must be distributed, but it also admonished the district court saying, you should, quote unquote, should. I don't know why they just said you shall. I don't know why they didn't use shall. You should revisit the payment schedule that you've issued because things may not be able to be processed as fast as you think they can. And why is that? It's because a United States District Court judge shouldn't be running the executive branch. This was a stupid ruling by the Supreme Court. And the only reason Roberts got to do it was because Amy Coney Barrett went along with it. Last night I was on TV with Mike Davis, and Mike Davis says that Barrett is scared to death of the public reaction to the court's decisions, that the demonstrations after the Dobbs decision was leaked in front of houses of the justices scared the living bezoozes out of her, and that she's become quite malleable and unimpressive. And by the way, her best friend on the court is Elena Kagan. Now, I just don't think Barrett's up to the job. I think she was probably a mistake, and there's nothing you can do about it. She's just, she's just there, and that's it. And that's what you get. We got this ridiculous decision yesterday. However, one good thing happened yesterday, and that was the D.C. Circuit ruled that the president can fire Hampton Dellinger, the special counsel, while that trial is pending. So, by the way, all of these cases are as a result of liberal groups filing lawsuits in district courts where they think they can get positive rulings against the president and can use nationwide injunctions to have one district judge rule all over the country to stop the president of the United States, the popularly elected president of the United States. If the Supreme Court doesn't stop nationwide injunctions very quickly, they are going to have a revolution on their hands. And they think that the demonstrations after the Dobbs case, look, it may be time for conservatives to start picketing the houses of justices.
Well, I got to tell you, it's interesting that you said that, but truly the left is focused on these protests. They're having protests outside all the time from the buildings of USAID, where they're saying fire Elon Musk, impeach President Trump. So they're activating on the left, despite the fact that the Democrats seem to be in a chaotic state of mind. But there was another case, and to your point, this is all about slowing down President Trump's actions. We saw on a judge ruling on Thursday that the Office of Personnel Management, which manages basically the human resources for the federal government, saying that they broke the law when it ordered other federal agencies to terminate thousands of probationary employees. So this again goes back to the fact that they're trying to stop the Trump administration from dramatically shrinking the federal workforce. So it really shows the nature of these activist judges. Tell us more about this particular ruling and what it means.
Well, first of all, the ruling is wrong. Probationary workers means exactly what it says. They're probationary workers. They don't have any rights. They don't have any civil service protections, by the way, that nobody should have. I think those civil service laws from the Jimmy Carter administration are absolutely absurd, but they exist. And this ruling, however, is simply wrong. It's just like the Supreme Court ruling on the USAID case. There is no reason in the world that a single federal judge should be able to stop the president of the United States from furloughing probationary workers. Just to say it is to sound stupid. The ruling itself, the judge ruled that these probationary workers do in fact have rights, and that the president cannot use the Office of Personnel Management to put them on probation. That's simply wrong. Now, will the Supreme Court be able to correct it? Who knows? The Supreme Court can only take so many cases, and that's the purpose of flooding the zone with all these cases. They know the Supreme Court can only take so many cases, and they're hoping they can win below and that the Supreme Court will never get there. Although after the way the Supreme Court acted yesterday, I'm not sure I want them to get there.
Real fast, I'm just stunned to hear that Amy Coney Barrett's bestie on the court is Elena Kagan. My lord! But
oh yeah, I can assure you, my sources are impeccable.
I can hear people shouting back at the radio. Well, maybe not shouting, but gently saying, well, hey, isn't it true that Scalia used to pal around with Ruth Bader Ginsburg? So what's the problem? But, Amy Coney Barrett is no Scalia. And for that matter, Kagan isn't anywhere near Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, there is a difference here, right?
Yes, correct. You've nailed it, as usual.
All right.
Look, the problem is Amy Coney Barrett was never ready for prime time. And she has proved it repeatedly. If you go back and look at her decisions, you cannot find a jurisprudential theme. The theme is caution, avoidance. And usually, it seems to have increased after the Dobbs case demonstrations, which, by the way, I have to tell you, I'm a great believer in the use of the grand jury to investigate very serious criminality. The leak of the Dobbs decision was a crime. I don't care what anybody says. And the fact that the Supreme Court did not want to allow the FBI to come in and ask questions, I can understand that. That's fine. But that doesn't stop me as a federal prosecutor or an attorney general from saying, you know what? We're going to subpoena every one of those former clerks, and we're going to put them under oath in a federal grand jury, and we're going to find out who leaked the Dobbs draft decision. That was one of the most
we still don't even know.
Pieces. That is one of the most destructive acts ever committed in our democracy, and it has not been accounted for, and it has to be.
All right, we'll leave it there, Joe. Listen, when it's revealed now on WMAL that Amy Coney Barrett's best friend on the court is Elena Kagan, I think this will get picked up and maybe have some ripple effects. And listen, we'd love to talk to the justice if she'd like to, have a conversation. I get a sense that she listens to NPR in the morning. Or maybe easy listening. I'm not sure. But We'd love to talk to her. Thank you, Joe. Always good to talk with you. Twice a
My
week.
pleasure.
Chris Plant, weekdays 9 to noon on 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.
We got some latest out of the border here. There was a hearing yesterday with mayors from major cities talking about what's going on in their cities with regard to illegal immigrants. But first, there was a dust-up between Chairman James Comer of Oversight with Ayanna Pressley. She's the bald Democrat who...
The bald Democrat.
Well, she's bald. What could I tell you?
Bald Democrat.
Here, cut 11.
You're so funny.
Mr. Chair, can I have several articles. I need to enter them. Let me just go ahead with what the articles are. What they speak to.
What's the next article?
Let me proceed. Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born Americans commit more rape and murder than immigrants.
Listen, this trend of you all trying to get thrown out of committee so you can get on MSNBC is going to end.
I do love that. They all violate the rules of the procedures of the hearing, bring up things that shouldn't be there, just so they can get silenced and shouted down, as James Comer put it, so you can show up on MSNBC, and it's got to end.
It was a 7-year-old article that Congresswoman Presley was trying to put into the record. But, I mean, this goes into the deeper questions, and I really think this hearing was critical. The billions and millions of dollars spent on illegal immigrants in these cities, just shocking.
It is critical, and we deserve to give it more time, which we don't have right now, but we will get to it a little later in the program. We're going to talk to Reagan Reese, who went to the border, and then we will play you some of the testimony we heard in this hearing. Right now it's 6:52.